Uh, uh, Cage and everybody got off the boat, and now he's getting more demonic visions again. They're doing a lot of world building for Armageddon. It's kind of useful, I guess. It's more useful in the next book, though. We spent 2 days getting ready. The secret storehouse was pretty much everything we want. There are weapons and ammo, obviously, but also rations, canteens, blankets, packs, picks, shovels, knives, mugs, bowls, binoculars, cold weather suits, mountaineering equipment, gas masks, breathers, eye shades, portable cookers, lanterns, tents, poles, rope, and 100 other things besides. The time not spent hunting down rogue boxes of ammo or searching through piles of foil wrap bagging for ration bars, we spent asleep or resting. We find blankets and bedrolls and make ourselves a cozy little camp in one corner of the warehouse, amongst the shelves of crates. The colonel seems pretty lax about keeping watch, but I continue to keep the practice going, that we stay sharp. I get the impression that he's giving us the time to regain our strength and build up our energy reserves for the next push. At first, it looked like there wouldn't be any problems, but then we worked out just how much this stuff weighed. There was no way we would be able to carry it on foot. The problem is, the heavier you pack, the slower your progress. And the slower your progress, the more water and rations you need, which in turn weigh more and take up more space. We can't rely on getting any kind of resupply until we reach the hive. And given the certain terrain we'll be crossing, as well as the possibility of bad weather, we could be hiking for anything up to 3 weeks to cover the hundreds of kilometers to Archeon. We lay out each pack and its contents in the small antechamber, and it becomes obvious that some things are just too big to carry. In the end, with the help of Spooge and advice from Finn, who knows a thing or two about extended missions, we narrow our needs down to the essentials. And then we all have a little space to bring some of our own preferences. For example, Brownie insists that as well as the heavy stubber he's dragged away from the jungles and the 500 rounds for it, a light mortar would be extremely useful. Finn, on the other hand, is all for carrying extra water to be on the safe side. Hidden in a dusty corner among piles of tent poles and coils of rope, I found a few innocent-looking boxes not even listed on Erasmus's inventory. Prying one open, I discovered it was full of gold coins. I guess the Inquisition isn't above greasing a few palms. A few years ago, such a find would have seemed a golden opportunity to make something for myself, but not now. Where the hell am I going to be able to exchange coin? What am I going to spend it on? For a start, I'll have to desert from the colonel, and that's gotten a lot harder than you might think. I got away from him once, legitimately, but he was waiting for me as soon as I screwed up. However, you never know what fate might deal you. So I make a secret compartment inside the lining of my pack and stash 20 of the coins. The others take a selection of spare sidearms, ammo, or extra rations according to their own needs and desires. While they are packing, the colonel goes over our planned route to Archeon with Finn, Ohebs, and I. I have to say, it doesn't look very appealing. To get down from the Diablo Mountains, we need to get past the overly tilted Orc Mountain. It's a huge volcano not far off from where we are and is teeming with feral orcs. Down the plains, we'll be south of the ruins of Hades Hive. It's not too risky to join the Hades Archon Highway because it's bound to be used by both Imperial forces and orcs as the battle lines shift back and forth between the two hives. And the nature of our mission means we have to stay away from both sides. We'll be cutting across the waste south of the highway until we reach Avaneres, a forge complex that sits across the road outside Archeon. From there, the colonel tells us there's a disused pipeway that leads across the wastes to the Archeon Underhive, allowing us to infiltrate von Strab's domain from within. It'll neatly bypass the Imperial forces around the hive, as well as the long-ranging patrols from the heavily fortified Hemlock Cordon. The whole area is also littered with orc drop sites, so the greenskins are constantly sallying forth from the landed rock fortresses across the wastes. and along the rivers. Generally, I am confident, though far from happy. It's not the orcs that are going to be the problem. Nobody's going to find a small group like us in those vast stretches of wilderness until they happen to roll straight into us. And we're more than capable of dealing with the odd scouting force or roaming orc band. No, the problem is the wilderness itself. The terrain is going to be hard going all the way, and there'll be no respite until we reach Avanaris. If we can get that far in good time, we'll have broken the back of the trek, and we start preparing for Archon itself. But I won't dwell on what we can do once we reach the hive itself. It's far better just to concentrate on getting there. Oebs provides to be a brilliant navigator. He studies the sketchy maps constantly and questions the Colonel or Finn about landmarks, route, and the conditions we're likely to encounter. Throughout the discussion, I feel the same uneasy feeling I get when I'm around him. I can't shake the notion that he seems to be keeping an eye on me for some reason. I still don't know everything about him or why Oriel saw fit to send him to Schaefer. I'll be watching him just as closely from now on. Anyone who's had dealings with the Inquisition knows enough to deserve scrutiny, because you can never be really sure, sure whether they've got some hidden plan or agenda. You might just have to wait it out and hope they aren't about to frag you too much. It'll be tricky, says Finn, who's leaning against the wall with an unopened rations pack in his hand. It'll be hot during the day and cold at night. We need to look for shaded campsites wherever possible. Storm season is just around the corner, too. This gets better and better, says Kindrug, shaking his head. He nurses his wounded leg. Perhaps I should have stayed at Infernus Quay. I'm not going to be making good progress on this. If you fall behind, you stay behind, the colonel says, standing in the doorway of the bear room. You carry your share, too. Arabian nights, like Arabian days, more often than not, get hotter than hot. The squad assembles outside in a ragged line in the descending darkness, with their bulging packs at their feet. The jagged silhouettes of ruined buildings jutting up above the warehouse merge in the night sky. I head back to the storehouse and find the colonel in conversation with Spooge and Kelv. But my orders were to take office here in Diabolus Forge, Erasmus is saying. His skin is reddened with exposure, but the flabbiness has disappeared in his recent exertions. I cannot disobey the directives of my masters. Do you have a copy of your orders? Says the colonel, holding out a hand. Spooge delves in the recesses of his clothing, pulls out a tattered scroll, and hands it to Schaefer. The colonel reads it briefly and then hands it back to Spooge. It says you are to report here to your post here for duties, says Schaefer, and I'm giving you your new duties. As much as I agree with you, Colonel, I'm afraid it's not possible, says Spooge. An Imperial Guard officer does not hold authority over an adept of the Minitorium Departamento. I pull my pistol from my belt and stride forward, pointing it at Spooge. I think you can safely say that you've done everything you can do to fulfill your orders, I say, stopping the pistol with an arm's length from his face. You're not offering me any choice, are you? He asks with gratitude on his face. I shake my head and then pivot on the spot to aim at Kelth. The tall navigator looks down his nose at me and sneers. This is ridiculous, he snorts. There is no reason to subject me to this imposition. What possible use could I be? I'm not the soldier. I have made that quite obvious. Everyone is useful, says the colonel, walking over and placing his hand on my arm to make me lower my weapon. Until now, you've had no choice but to accompany me. I could force you to continue, but you are right. That would serve little purpose. So let me go. Says Kelth, crossing his arms. Let me walk away. For security reasons, I cannot do either, says Schaefer, walking to Kelth, his hands clasped above his back. He pauses for a moment, then looks into the navigator's gray eyes. What we're doing here is not a game, the colonel says finally. I do not dress up the importance of my missions, and this operation ranks amongst the highest I have ever led. Armageddon hangs in the balance, and the slightest nudge in either direction could turn the war. He walks away, head bowed, before turning again, an arm outstretched towards Kelth. The navigator watches him with a wary expression, occasionally glancing at me with distaste. Von Strab is hiding out in the underhive, the colonel says. The forces drawn into Archeon by his presence are far beyond any military threat posed by this so-called Army of Liberation. However, the moral threat he poses is far greater than any other on the planet. We cannot allow Ghazghkull to have any such man under his sway, whether it be as a pawn or as an ally. I am not trained for your war, says Kelth, with a heavy shrug. I am the Navos Nobilite, and I have a higher calling than crawling around in the dirt dodging bullets. I was born to steer mighty ships through the ether and to bring warships to battle. I am no use to you. I'll say it again, says Schaefer. Everyone is useful. None of us can see how this will end. It may be that the Emperor has some part for you to play. You are here now. All the starships in the fleet and all the soldiers of the Imperial Guard have battered themselves against this orc horde, grinding this war into a stalemate. Now, we have a chance. A lone, slim chance to be victorious. Can you honestly walk away from this? Would you ever forgive yourself for passing up an opportunity to do something real, something genuine in your life? Will the Emperor forgive you? Kel is amazed by the passion in the colonel's voice, but his expression changes, back to his usual one of superiority and suspicion. I don't know why the colonel is so keen to have him with us. Perhaps he really believes he could have been brought together by the Emperor. It doesn't matter. If the colonel wants him, I'll deliver him. We are called the Last Chancers, I say, and Kelth turns on me, eyes narrowed. We're all given a last chance because we have wronged the Emperor with our crimes. Perhaps you deserve a last chance to do something truly exceptional with your life. Even if you don't do it for the Imperium and the Emperor, think of yourself and your family. Few people will know what we do here, but those in power, those whose words shape our futures, they will find out. Think what good it will do for the standing of your family to be associated with a great victory. Those imperial commanders, those nobles, will owe you a debt of honor, so your future can be prosperous. I'm surprised by my own conviction, and a turn of phrase I didn't think I was capable of. As a devious, calculating look enters Kelth's eyes, I wonder what's brought his sudden surge of loyalty in me. The navigator interrupts my thoughts. I would need some form of assurance, he says, stroking his chin. A letter. Write me a letter detailing the events that have occurred here. Have it sealed and sent to High Command. I want it to be forwarded to our estates on Terra. The colonel thinks for a moment, then nods. Spooge, come with me and we will draft this letter, he says. The scribe heads off into the recesses of the storeroom. The colonel gives Kelth a hard look before turning and following him. The navigator looks at me, a smug smile on his face. The colonel will be true to his word, he says. Yes, he will, I say, walking right up to him to stare him right in the eye. And that means you're one of us now, one of his, one of mine. You can start by grabbing your pack. I ignore his disconcerted look, and I walk off, chuckling to myself. I like Kelth a lot. He probably looks like this or something. That's what I imagine. He's easily the most flamboyant of the bunch. Oh, shit. Did you miss me, Henry, while I was gone? I missed you, buddy. Did you miss me, Salem, while I was gone? I missed you too, kitten. Arabian night, like Arabian days. Do a couple reps. Do a couple reps. Do a couple reps and you'll be true. I swear my coffee was right. Oh, stupid. With new uniforms, boots, and weapons, we carry full belts and packs. We're ready to set off at last light. In single file, we step to the shadows. In the dark sky above us, the odd flicker of a jet soars overhead, while the evening air echoes with a distant thump of heavy artillery. The sky to the south is illuminated by detonations. Lori leads the way, a little ahead of the rest of us. We make our way over cratered ferrocrate roads and march between broken piles of rocks and half-buried walls. Banks of earth are piled up as crude, abandoned defenses across from some streets. A deep dip in the ground turns out to be the footprint of a passing titan. Its weight pulverized the brick into dust and compacted the mud into a rock hardened surface. Erasmus starts panting under the weight of his pack just after a few minutes. Cal starts to fall to the rear alongside Kindrug. At least the drop trooper has the excuse of a busted leg. The other two are just out of shape. After a few days' hard slog, we'll soon see if they can make it all the way or not. If they're still with us in 5 days' time, I reckon they'll be good for the whole trek. If not, the scavenging rats of the ash waste will strip every morsel of flesh from their bones. While we march between the shattered shells of Infernus Forge, I marvel at how much destruction has been heaped upon Armageddon. I've been to war zones before, from the Tyranid scoured fields of Icar 4 to the trench lines of Court Norum, but I've never seen a world so wholly torn up. Finn sees me looking around and drops back to fawn beside me. This all happened in the first few days of the invasion, he says, waving a hand encompassing his ruined the complex. It was once teeming with Adeptus Mechanicus, but when the Gargants came, only the Adepts Titans could match the firepower of the Orc war machines. The whole place was virtually destroyed in the crossfire. We pass a toppled monument, a larger-than-life-size statue of a Marine, his ornate armor emblazoned with a winged blood drop. That's Dante, says Finn, stopping to gaze sadly at the fallen sculpture. He shakes his head. The Blood Angels were our saviors in the Second War. When Ghazghkull first came here, there are monuments across the planet. There's even a shrine of thanks at Cerberus. You seem bitter, I say, noticing the deep frown creasing the Orc Hunter's forehead. Monuments, memorials, arches, and statues, he spits, rounding on me with a snarl. Instead of rebuilding our defenses or repairing the factories, von Strab has squandered our resources on these effigies, and more than half of them are dedicated to him. We won't see it, but there's a huge arch on the approaches to Archeon that commemorates his part in the Second War. It was erected by his cronies after he disappeared. We stop as the colonel signals from ahead. He is standing at a junction between the remnants of two huge smelting plants and conferring with Lori Nohebs. You'll have to fill me in, I say. History was never my strong point, especially not when it concerns events on the other side of the galaxy. I squat down on a piece of fallen masonry. Finn sits near me and pulls free his knife and whetstone, as he always does when we take a break. The others sense an opportunity for a quick rest, even though we've barely been going an hour, and they set themselves down on the side of the rubble-strewn roadway. In the last war, it was rumored that von Strab had sided with the Orcs, says Finn. His words are punctuated by the scrape of the whetstone. Armageddon is so important strategically that his family have been given free rein for tens of generations. Even before the wars, life here was never easy, except for the Overlord's family and his so-called advisors. But the tanks rolled off the production lines. Minerals were shipped out according to the tithes. So no one cared, not until the Orcs arrived. Anyways, then von Strab suddenly became the center of attention. He stops sharpening the knife, tests the blade with his thumb. A small bead of blood drops from the tip. He nods up, and I look to see the colonel waving us on. Sheathing his knife, Finn stands up and stretches. The rest of us pull ourselves to our feet and help each other with the weight of our packs. If it hadn't been for Commissar Yarrick holding out at Hades, Ghazghkull would have overrun us last time, Finn says as we start. Von Strab said he had some master plan to win the war. It turned out his family had a stash of virus missiles they'd been keeping secret for centuries. I don't know what they thought they might be used for, but I'm pretty bloody sure it wasn't in the event the Orcs invaded. Anyway, that's beside the point. The missiles are so ancient that half of them malfunctioned and fell on our own troops. After that, Yarrick made moves to have von Strab removed from power, but he disappeared with Ghazghkull after the Blood Angels attack on the main Orc headquarters. Nobody heard anything from him until Ghazghkull came back, transmitting his messages from Archean. What message? Says Brownie, who is a little way behind us. Finn waves a hand for Kindrug to follow us, and he fishes around in the drop trooper's pack. He pulls out the compact comlink receiver and switches it on. Static and chopped messages squawk from the speaker as Finn twists the frequency dial. He stops, and we listen to a reedy voice with just discernible between the cracking and hissing. Brave citizens of Armageddon, I beseech you to unite with me and cast off the shackles of imperial oppression. Join us in our holy cause. Your prince has returned to lead you to freedom. There's more hissing, though an audible clicking before the voice starts again. The glorious... Finn snaps off the comlink as the colonel comes striding back down the road towards us. He snatches the comlink and rams it into Kindrug's pack, a growl in his throat. Nobody uses the link, Schaefer barks, angrily tightening the cords on his pack. The force jerks Kindrug backwards and almost pulls him off his feet. Are you afraid we might get swayed by such persuasive rhetoric? Asks Kelth, coming up from behind. You should know better, the colonel says in a low hiss. Sound carries far at night. Not talking. We are not talking until we clear the forges. He waves us on, but puts his hands on my shoulder to stop me. He turns around to face me. You in particular should know what is at stake, he whispers. Even in the darkness, I can see the angry glint of his icy eyes. We must succeed. You know, it is one thing for him to be worried about the sound, the noise, but also, actually, never mind. As long as the radio thing wasn't transmitting, it was only receiving. They couldn't triangulate it. So good job, Gowthrope. You know something. Why? I say, stepping out of his grasp. Why the frag are we so emperor-damned important? I don't believe your crap about us being the only ones who could do this. The colonel checks ahead, and once satisfied the others are out of earshot, motions for me to start walking. He strides alongside me on those long pegs of his, looking straight ahead, not even glancing. There are currently those in the Inquisition who are working on a more drastic solution to the Von Strab problem, he says, his words quiet and clipped. We are to be the last attempt at a covert conclusion. Covert conclusion? I ask, glancing down at my foot as it catches a piece of rubble and sends it skittering over the rockcrete. The noise bounces back off the dark, hollow shells of buildings around us. Suddenly, I feel very exposed and understand the colonel's anger at the use of the comlink. The troops inside Archeon have achieved nothing in their search for Von Strab, the colonel says. There are inquisitors who believe that the threat he poses to the stability of the sector is such that any sacrifice pales in comparison. Like Coret Norum? I can tell where the colonel is going with this. They want to destroy Archeon? Yes, the colonel says, finally glancing at me for the briefest moment. We destroyed Coret Norum, I say. If what you say is true, then perhaps these inquisitors are right. Coret Norum was irrevocably infected, Schaefer replies. Even those who had not been directly corrupted by the Genestealer infestation were exposed to its spiritual heresy. There is a strong resistance movement inside Archeon, not to mention the thousands of our own troops who are conducting operations in there. But they'll be pulled out before we strike, won't they? The colonel shakes his head. Why the hell not? To do so will let Von Strab guess our intentions, he says, giving him the opportunity to escape. That comm signal is obviously recording. So how does anyone know that Von Strab is still in Archeon? I ask. Somehow a stone has worked its way into my boot and is pressing against my big toe. I wiggle my toes to shift it, trying to concentrate on the colonel at the same time. Nobody knows if he is still in there, the colonel says heavily. These hardline inquisitors are prepared to sacrifice Archean just to be sure. You were telling Kelth about the last chance. Well, we are the last chance for Archean. One of the inquisitors opposed to this course of actions is an old colleague of Inquisitor Oriel. When he heard about the operation against Brightsword, he specifically requested that Oriel intervene and asked me to deal with the situation. But who would be willing to carry out such orders? I say. Surely there will be resistance to the annihilation of a hive full of people. The resistance has been our ally until now, he says. He looks up to the cloud-covered night sky as if to look into space. However, a battle barge of the Marines Malevolent is currently disengaging itself from its current duties and will be preparing for the bombardment. So, that's the great hurry, I say, realizing someone's been buying time for us. Buying it with the lives of Imperial soldiers and Space Marines, the colonel murmurs, his face grim. Despite our best efforts, time is running short, desperately short, in fact. We have 20 days, 25 at the most, before the destruction of Archean begins. In 20 days, if we have not removed Von Strab, millions of soldiers and citizens in Archean will die under Imperial guns. We march all night, taking short breaks every couple of hours to catch our breath and take air from our breather tanks. It would have been impossible for us to carry enough air for the whole journey, and so all we can do is periodically clear out our lungs of the gas and filth that clings to the Diablo Mountains, like the tar on rocks. Our faces are covered in grime, and our fatigues hang heavy with accumulated dust and filth. And this is after only the first night. My clothes are greasy on my skin, and dirt stirred up from the wind has worked its way into every opening in my uniform. Grit inside the neckline chafes my throat. My hands are raw from scraping against the grip of my lasgun, and my heavy pack bites deep into my shoulders. My back aches, my calf muscles are tighter than coiled steel, and my eyes are gummed up with sweat and dust. The wind is bitterly cold, and the layers of clothes I'm wearing do little to blunt its bite. I'd rather be someplace else. Dawn finds us huddled in a depression in a large boulder. I'm on first watch, and as light slowly seeps across the sky, dull through the thick clouds, I finally get to see the pass and the ash waste below. Munching on a ration bar, I look down at the valley that stretches down between the two low, rounded peaks. The rocks glisten like an oil slick in the yellow light. A few pale, twisted trees rise out of the cracks and crevices in large rocks. Behind me, I hear the squad slumbering fitfully. Their snorts, coughs, and snores blend in with the shrill noise of the wind that comes down the mountainside. I can barely see them. They are hidden under their bedrolls and nooks and crannies. Tendrils that drift with blood erupt from the ground, spraying the still bodies with gore and dirt. Blissfully unaware of the danger, they continue to sleep. The gray tentacles wrap around them, squeezing tight. They awake with chokes and screams. Their necks snap, their organs burst under the pressure. Their faces are crushed by the tendrils. Lifted into the air, the ragged shapes erupt with blood that sprays from ruptured arteries. Their limbs are pulled from their sockets and waved around as trophies. A victorious scream fills the silent air as the tentacles swirl, and the blood and dust churn into obscene patterns. The air starts to shimmer, and half-seen forms appear in the bloody mist that wells up from the dismembered corpses. I realize the scream is mine, that I am reveling in the slaughter before me. I am infused with the power of the sacrifice. I feel hot, in the throes of ecstatic revelation, and energy courses throughout my body. Your watch is over. I yelp with surprise. Ohebs is standing in front of me, leaning down over the lip of the hollow that I'm secreted in. Where the frag did you come from? I snap. Emperor's tits, man. I could have just sawed and shot you. His eyes meet me darkly. He eyes me darkly, his gaze lingering on my face. You look tired, Cage, he says eventually. Your eyes are very bloodshot. Of course I'm tired, you meathead, I say, raising my feet. I've been awake for the last 20 hours straight. Are there any other meaningful observations you'd like to make? Any other pearls of wisdom you want to drop in my direction? It looked like you were in a trance, he says, obviously picking his words with care. You were staring at the camp. I thought you were asleep with your eyes open. He look I look sharply at him, trying to read his thoughts, but his face is as impassive as ever. I feel a cramp in my stomach and dizziness momentarily grips me. Just keep yourself awake, all right? I snap, pushing past him. He doesn't reply. I stomp down into the sheltered depression where the others are still sleeping. Kendra gives me a wordless nod as he comes in from the other side where he's been watching the route we came by. I give him a hurried wave and then throw myself down next to my pack. Pulling up my blanket, I roll over with my back to the others. My thoughts are racing. One moment, I was looking down the valley, and the next Ohebs was in front of me. There's no way he could have come up on me without making some kind of sound, and I'm pretty keen-eyed and keen-eared. The nausea has subsided, and I'm left with a little edge of panic. Breathing deeply, I close my eyes. I am bone-tired. I wish sleep would sweep over me, but the more I long for it, the more awake I become. I can hear the blood rushing to my ears, and I can feel every stone and lump underneath me. My heart is hammering in my chest. I sense a distant whispering, a voice just on the edge of my hearing, and I roll over and over to see who it is. Everyone else is asleep. My fatigue finally pulls me into sleep. The voices start to get louder. So Cage is absolutely possessed by a demon, and it possesses him at the beginning of the book. See, the whole demon plotline for me, it's like good and bad. It kind of like, it's almost like two wrongs make a right, because in the last one he had PTSD, which he's like over now, but it didn't really matter. It didn't really like change anything except in training. It didn't come up, but now he has these moments where he just completely loses control. But that's what should have happened in the last book. I almost feel like the last book was just him like no longer being a bad boy. He did his last little trick and he's like, I'm no longer a bad boy. And he even like says earlier, like a couple pages ago, he's like, I'm not gonna go against the colonel no more. It's not a good idea. So I guess instead of being a criminal, now he's just possessed. Oh, what the fuck? Okay. Lori wakes me just before dusk. After a quick bite to eat and some water from my canteen, I'm ready to go. The colonel leads off, heading down the pass to the left side of the main track. He weaves a path through those scattered boulders and stubby bushes. After about an hour, the pass makes a bit of a hump. At last rise before plunging down into the waste below. Schaefer heads further to the left, up the side of the steep ridge. Aren't we silhouetting ourselves? Asked Brownie nervously. It's not even dark yet. There is something I want you to see, replies the colonel, pointing to the northeast. In the evening gloom, we can see right across the wastes. Just before the horizon is a dark blot, from which hundreds of columns of smoke and vapor rise into the air. A small mountain-like shape is rising out of the wastes, surrounded by smaller blobs. The place is lit from within by innumerable fires. Some are just flickers, but others rise high into the air. Hades' hive, says Finn, bowing his head and making the sign of the eagle across his chest. There's nothing left, says Brownie. On the contrary, millions of refugees, soldiers, space marines, and orcs are out there, says the colonel. It is still a constant battle for control of the ruins. Commissar Yarick declared that Hades would never fall. Blood is spilt to ensure that he does not have to break his word. Is that what is to become of Archean? I ask. The colonel glares at me. I'd forgotten. He hadn't told me, he hadn't told the others about the Inquisitor's plan to flatten the place. It is a possible fate for all the hives on Armageddon, the colonel says, smoothing over the subject. The orcs will ravage this world. And without Armageddon's factories, without the forges and the hives, worlds 100 light years from here will weaken and wane. And a long chain that stretches all the way back to Holy Terra itself, Archeon, could be the turning point in preventing all that. Alternatively, our failure could see the beginning of the end of the Imperium. That sounds overly dramatic, says Kelth. He's taken off his pack and has leaned it against the rock. To do so is a mistake because you only have to struggle to put it on again. I wish this were a simple melodrama, says the colonel, and I wish I was merely taking speeches to rouse you, but I am not. We are beset on all sides in a galaxy full of enemies. Our foes are held back only by the Emperor's vast fleets, his armies, and the might of the Space Marines. If those foes sense weakness, they will descend on us like a pack of scavengers and pick apart the Imperium piece by piece. A squad is only as good as its weakest member, and the Imperium is only as strong as its weakest world. We contemplate this in the silence as the colonel leads us back down the ridge. The sight of a smoldering, ruined hive that once teemed with hundreds of millions of lives is certainly one I'll never forget. I've seen horror in the eyes of a strangled woman, and on a battlefield, literally heaving with the wounded crawling over the dead. Even the crater that was left from Court Norum, the death place of over 3 million souls, was nothing compared to the ruination of Hades. I can understand why Yarick won't abandon the desolate hive. He made his stand against Gazgul's first invasion. Like the colonel says, if you falter for just one moment, you're dead. And if you show the smallest hint of weakness or mercy, then you'll be taken out and fragged, good and proper. It's a small way. In a small way, it's a shame that we're going to Archean. I'd like to fight in defense of Hades. It somehow seems appropriate for the last chancers to fight for something broken. Hey, move your ass, says Kindrug from behind me, breaking into my melancholy thoughts. I realize I've slowed down. Piss off, I say to him without turning around. I pick up the pace, eager to put the ruins of Hades behind me. There is just a little bit of world build. I mean, there's just like a little bit too much world building going on. I feel like every time Finn opens his mouth, it's just like, and then this battle happened, and then there's a battle over here, and it's like, yeah, I get it. The part, I guess it is good that he opens his mouth because he talks about Von Strab, and he's like, what did he say? He's like, oh yeah, instead of like building defenses or factories, he just built these stupid statues. And then he's like, oh yeah, these virus bombs, these virus missiles accidentally landed in our own troops. That neither of those things was an accident, even slightly. Von Strab is a traitor, and now I realize why he has to die. Because no one can even tell if he's truly a traitor or not. Like, even though he's done traitorous activities. Move your ass, says Kindrug. If I thought that the jungle was hard going, then the Diablo Mountains then the Diablo Mounts an ordeal. Then the Ash Wastes have to be the worst terrain I have ever had to cross. And that includes our forced march across the ice fields of Cragmere. Discolored sand and ash stretch out as far as we can see. Heat shimmers off the undulating dunes. The wind blows constantly, whipping a constant mist of ash into your face. Its touch burns the skin without chemical pollution. With our hoods pulled tight over our heads, rebreathers in our mouths, and our noses clamped shut, each of us is enclosed in our own personal world. We are unable to communicate, even with the person just a few meters in front. The ground is constantly shifting underfoot. Each step sees you sinking your ankles into the orange and red ash, but our pace slows to a crawl. The colonel pushes us for longer than before so that we can make camp only when the pre-dawn glow touches the horizon. During the night, the temperature drops rapidly. Our sweat freezes on our skin, and our breath billows from our filters like tank exhaust fumes. It's the only moisture there is. The ash underfoot just stays the same because there's no water in it to freeze. Occasionally, we see explosions far off and we steer away from them, or hear the roar of a jet passing low overhead. On second thought, on the second night, a huge wave of Imperial bombers passes over us, attacking a position no more than 10 kilometers away. We stop to watch the display. Cluster bombs and incendiaries light up the sky for nearly an hour. Each step is painful. I drag my foot from the sucking ash and plant it in front of me, hauling myself forward. The pack on my back seems to hold the weight of the galaxy. Breathing slowly to conserve the air tanks, we claw our way up the dunes and on our hands and knees, and the wind drags dust to obscure the tracks behind us. Sometimes the ground is rockier as we breast some ridge, so we pick up the pace. Kindrug is almost in constant agony. He is literally dragging his bad leg behind him towards the end of each night's hike. At other times, the ashes are like an ocean. The ash has no substance. It is just thin dust that the wind sliced through, creating constantly moving waves. Just like the water, we wade through it or swim across the top of it on our stomachs, craning our necks back so the toxic dust doesn't get in our rebreathers. We almost lost Erasmus at one point. Crossing an ash lake, he forged forwards with loops of heavy stubber ammo around his chest and waist, and his malfunctioning servo skull crammed under one arm. He lost his footing and slipped forwards. The weight of the bullets began to drag him under. Brownie managed to get his hands under Erasmus's chin and hold his head free while the rest of us clawed at the dust, trying to scoop him out. As the ground shifted and settled, we ended up waist deep in the ash. He floundered around for a few minutes until Ohebs found some sturdier ground just a little way off. Now we use our lasguns to probe the ground ahead of us, checking to see how solid it is. He was lucky we found him. Visibility is no more than a couple of meters in the darkness. It was thanks to his shouts and the clanking of his bullets that we could zero in on his position. Emperor alone knows how the Colonel and Ohebs lead us in the right direction. Except for first and last light, the sun's glow is pretty much constant in all directions. We can only judge by the prevailing winds that come from ahead and to our left that we're not traveling in circles. Well, I hope we're not. Each day, as the light of the sun begins to glow through the clouds, we pitch the crude shelters to protect against the wind, like little more than two-sided sheet held up on a pole. There's nothing for the pegs to bite into, so we hold down the guy ropes with ammo cans and packs. After setting up camp each day, we break out the rations and use one of the low detection stoves that the orc hunters take into the jungle. A ration bar crumbled into a little boiled water makes a passable broth. We cluster around the heat stove from the heat from the plate with our gloves off, taking it in turns to bask in the relative warmth. But with the coming of the sun, the heat of the day steadily grows until it's like a furnace. We don't remove our protective gear. Any piece of exposed flesh by the elements are raw and blistered. We wear tinted goggles for the most part, which shade our eyes from the glare reflecting off the rising mounds and ridges on every side. My cheeks are cracked and started bleeding yesterday. Only 4 days into the march, and my eyebrows have started falling out. We slumber fitfully into our shelters, each of us exhausted from the day's toll, but too uncomfortable to find solace in sleep. We don't even pretend to be keeping watch. We can barely see 20 meters from the dust and heat haze. Nobody's looking for us in any case. They'd have to walk straight over us to spot us. Better that time is spent resting, digging into those reserves of energy for the next night's march. Our bodies slowly thawing as the morning turns to afternoon. The constant temperature changes are playing havoc with the equipment. I'm pretty sure the barrel of my lasgun is warped and points slightly to the right now. I don't think it'll be much use in a firefight anyway, now that grit has got into the lenses and trigger mechanism. I make a point of remembering to tell everyone to clean and check their weapons before bedding down each day, so that if trouble comes, we might be able to at least fire back. When it's time to break camp, we almost have to dig ourselves out. Ash and dust gather on the shelters and leaves a layer over our packs. Each of us spends several minutes excavating in the dying light to find several hidden magazines or spare boots. 7 days in, and we're all fit to drop. I'm so dog tired. I'm staggering from one step to the next. Every fiber in my body, every moment of my concentration is focused on taking the next step. I hear voices in the wind, but I know they can't be real voices. I would only be able to hear the others over the wind, and through my thick hood if they stood right next to me and shouted. The waste turned to an undulating morass of greens and oranges, deep reds and blackened ash. The laces on my boots have been eaten away by corrosive dust, and my coat is frayed and torn in places. My face burns, my eyes water constantly, my throat feels red-hot needles. Even taking off my rebreather to take a gulp of water is an arduous task. We have to try not to breathe in the toxic fumes that swirl around us. We pass a lake of oil that burns with a green flame. There are remnants of a twisted machine at its heart. The heat is welcome in the freezing night, so we stay there for a short while, not caring that we can be silhouetted against the blaze. There's nothing out here to see us. There's nothing out here at all. Or so I think. We're just getting ready to camp on the 8th dawn when shimmering figures appear in the gloom about 50 meters away. I think I'm seeing things, but they soon solidify into the shape of a small group of men riding on the backs of strange mounts. Despite our fatigued state and numb brains, we react quickly. I sling off my pack and drop it to the ground, lasgun ready. Ahead and to my right, Erasmus arrives forward with the ammo for Brownie's heavy stubber. The colonel has his pistol in his hand and waves Kindrug and Kelth to circle to the left. Laurie and Finn have already broken to the right. Ohebs takes cover behind his pack a few meters behind me to my left. He rests his lasgun across the pack and squints through the goggles along its length. The riders see us and halt. One of them comes forward, pulling a rifle from a sling that hangs behind the leg. The six-legged creature he's riding is covered in long, shaggy fur and has a pointed snout and heavy shoulders. Its broad, webbed feet step across the surface of the ash without sinking. It tosses its head from side to side, snorting constantly. I can't see any obvious ears or eyes. The rider is swathed from head to toe in ragged cloth. Over this, he wears heavy black robes, two bandoliers across his chest. His legs are protected by a long quilted skirt split up to the groin, under which are heavy trousers. Dark goggles glint from under the scarf across his face, and I can see nothing of his expression. He rides forward with his rifle pointing up, and the others hand in the reins of his other hand on the reins of his beast. He stops about 50 meters away, glancing left and right. I train my lasgun on his chest, my finger easing on the trigger. I spare a second to use my sleeve to wipe the grime from my eye shades before taking aim again. To the right, there's a stutter of autogun fire. The colonel brings up his pistol immediately, but I've squeezed the trigger first. So does Ohebs. The two lasbolts strike the rider almost simultaneously. My shot detonates some kind of ammunition on the bandolier, and the other punches through his right shoulder. The beast rears as Brownie opens up. The roar of the heavy stubber sounds over the wind, and two of the riders further out pitch from their saddles. There's more autogun fire from the right, replied with the zip of lasguns. Suddenly, every one of my senses works just fine. I fire off shots at the clusters of riders as they're turning their mounts to run. I catch one of their steeds in the flank, and it jinks wildly, almost toppling its rider, before they both disappear in the gloom. We continue to fire after them, not knowing whether we're hitting anything or not. The lead rider is slumped across the neck of his mount, which just stands there dumbly until the colonel puts a bolt into its skull. It falls sideways in a cloud of ash and dust. Brownie lets off a couple more bursts before everything falls silent, except the hissing of the wind. There are another few shots from the right, and I think I hear a shout, but I can't be sure. We wait to see if they regroup for another attack. A minute passes, then another, and still we don't move. After days of monotonous slog, the sudden action fuses my body, making me almost twitch with energy. I strain every nerve to stay calm. We turn as two figures emerge from our right, dragging something between them. We relax when we see Finn and Laurie, bringing back a trophy of their own fight. With Ohebs, Finn, Brownie, and Spooge still standing watch, we gather around the dead rider. He looks like the others we downed, hidden beneath layer after layer of clothes. Kelth pulls the scarf from the rider's head to reveal a face pitted and worn with exposure, the skin thick and leathery, scabs and boils clustered around the lips, and his teeth little more than blackened stumps. Laurie briefly pulls out her breather to speak, trying not to breathe in too much. There were 4 of them, trying to get behind us, she says, pausing to inhale through her breather. One of them saw Finn and opened fire. The colonel nods before pulling his own mouthpiece. Nomad raiders, he says. There could be more. We will move in case they return. Set watch during the day. I nod as he turns at me for acknowledgement. Placing the pistol in its holster, he waves for us to move out. His head turns from left to right as he scans for any sign of the raiders. Already the ash has covered the bodies, And by the time we sort ourselves out and move away in single file, the only evidence of them is a few dark mounds. As we slip away into the swirling dust, a distant, haunting cry carries along the wind. It's a signal, there's no doubt. Clutching our weapons tighter, we cast nervous glances all around us and hurry off. The Ash Wastes, guys. The Ash Wastes Raiders.